opposed to maybe taking a little course off, like it usually does.
Raising a lot of anxieties, I guess, for people.
Sure. Also for people like, homeowners and people who have more, personal things at stake than maybe I do. That's why I'm calm.
The closer the water was getting, we decided we better leave. So.
It was making you feel a bit anxious?
Right.
Coming up pretty quick. It was up the steps there. Probably had another couple feet to go before it was over the bulkhead. We better go while it gets good. So look at that.
Well, the typical male around here, I would have stayed home, but my father wanted to come, and he lives across the street, so I brought him here. Yeah.
What are the conditions like out there?
It's pretty windy out there. Raining, steady, constant.
Anxieties aside, but they know that they could be in for a long wait here. This Red Cross Centre is actually at a high school. There are a couple more not so far away as well that are attracting. Who knows with this storm, as they say, is beyond powerful, beyond strong, a 1-in-100-year event. People just aren't quite sure what to expect.
That was Lisa Miller, our correspondent, reporting there from Delaware. So that's just to the south of where Hurricane Sandy is right now. It seems to have slowed down over the last hour or so in terms of how fast it's been moving, and it seems to be the case that the eye has been hovering over Atlantic City for the last hour or so, but continuing to move slowly northwest with winds up to 130 k's an hour. And I'll just mention now that Foreign Affairs Minister Bob Carr is about to hold a media conference in Canberra. This is updating the travel advice for Australians on the east coast. We've heard that there are 12,000 flights that have been cancelled in the US, so obviously there are a lot of Australians who will have been affected by this in terms of getting travel across the US. And we've flooded streets in New York City itself. Hopefully we'll be able to bring you that image shortly of cars up to the side of their windows with water. So water is starting to flood through the streets of New York City. Now, the impact of Hurricane Sandy isn't restricted to the US. It's also having an impact on Canada's eastern cities. Joining me now from Toronto is Sana Kadar, who's one of our producers here at ABC.
Hi, Joe. Well, I'm on the 14th floor of an apartment building in downtown Toronto, and from my view, I can see several blocks of the city are completely black. They're pitch black, although far off in the distance there are quite a few buildings still with power, but we're hearing that about 11,000 residents in Toronto are without power right now, and earlier in the day, several hundred people lost power throughout the province. So that figure might well have climbed up in the last few hours.
Yeah. Okay, I'll just point out that's a live shot we can see there of New York City. We're talking to Sana Kadar in Toronto. Just filling us in on the situation in Toronto because this storm affects such a huge area. And so we've been hearing and so the expectation is at that stage that the winds could still be up around that 100 k an hour mark, and that there could be substantial rainfall as well.
Yeah, for sure. There's flooding risk more so around Niagara region, which is further south of Toronto. The biggest issue in Toronto, they've been saying all day, the mayor of Toronto, is the wind and the potential for downed power lines, for tree branches to fall. Toronto Hydro, which is the biggest factor affecting the city today.
Okay, Sana Kadar in Toronto. Thanks very much for that.
Thank you.
Alicia Barry joins us now with an update on the markets.
Well, Virgin Australia has announced a string of deals as it raises the stake in its rivalry with competitor Qantas. Virgin says it plans to buy...
And Hartford also affected, and we have 7 hubs affected on the East Coast, and what they're struggling through this, it is American, it is U.S. Airways, Delta, it is United, it is JetBlue, South, all looking at situations where their planes are out of position. You can imagine that it's going to take them days to recover. And oh, by the way, this isn't just affecting flights in the United States. Flights outside of the United States that can't get into the country are also affected. And so this backup ripple effect continues and continues. Also, Amtrak has canceled its service along the Northeast Corridor today at least. Likely we will be affected tomorrow as well. But New York up to, D.C. up to New York and possibly up to Boston affected today on the Amtrak line. The airlines are all waiving their change fees, I should add, and so if you have to rebook, you should not be paying any fees for that, but you should expect that even though airline
times, so we're pretty sure this is reliable or retweeted. So this is apparently near 14th Street there. The advisory from the National Hurricane Centre feet at Kings Point in New York and 8.4 feet at the Battery in New York. So we'll bring you more of those images as they come through the impact of Hurricane Sandy. Now, I've been studying across how Australians might be affected by this superstorm. Reporter Claire Ayres joins me now. Claire, what's Steve been saying?
Well, you heard the Foreign Minister Bob Carr just there saying that the time for moving around in New York is over, that people should be staying where they are. Now, we normally think of the US in terms of a travel destination as somewhere that's quite safe, and so obviously normally it's on a low level alert.
Crane on a high rise, the arm had bent over earlier today. It's hard to tell exactly because it's
watch out, Carnegie Hall.
It may be leaning even more, and we read out a tweet from the New York Post earlier, just in the last hour or so. 900 people who were staying at the, I think it was the Meridian Plaza motel, which is just near there. So it might just keep that live shot up while we're talking to Claire. And Claire was just going through the advice that the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade had been giving to Australian residents there. Oh, so Australians who were
flights between LA, which is where Australia flies directly to, have their
products that just don't measure up.
But they span everything from the travel industry to finance to digital to food and even health and white goods.
Hello and welcome to ABC News across Australia. I'm Ros Childs. That mega storm has closed Wall Street, so with no lead from the US, the local share market is ticking up. The All Ords is up almost 15 points. Nikkei's higher, that's the Dow figure from the close of trade last week, and the dollar is at 103 US cents. More finance later in the bulletin. It's been called the storm of the century. Hurricane Sandy has now been downgraded to a post-tropical storm, but it's still packing a big punch as it slams into the east coast of the United States. 50 million people are under threat. Many have left their homes, turning some of America's biggest cities into ghost towns. President Obama has declared emergencies in 9 states. 1 person is reported dead. North America correspondent Lisa Miller is in Delaware on the mid-Atlantic coast. Concerned about what will happen. All the cranes were checked before this storm to make sure that they'd be able to make it through, but this one is now leaning precariously in its spot. And we've also seen an apartment building that was basically left a shell when the winds of up to 150 kilometres an hour ripped through that area. So it seems that we will see repeated, we'll probably hear of more damage once it's daylight, once we get a sense of just what went on. But as I said, it was going to be a monster storm, and that's what has occurred. Lisa, Sandy has now been downgraded, but just give us an idea, if you could, of how big this storm is. I've never seen mornings like this in the lead up to a storm when city was going to be under. Let's have a listen.
I can't emphasize enough, stay indoors and certainly away from the parks, the beaches, the boardwalks, piers.